and that he wrote them himself. Our reporting is that 3 days out of this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, he had sessions with his attorneys carefully going over these questions. His lawyers are helping him write the answers to these questions. So the question now is, when exactly will he submit
What do we know about
this?
the questions?
So we know that there's 5 different buckets of these questions. They center around alleged Russian meddling during the 2016 campaign, and there's about 24 of them. And at least our reporting is, as we saw, he was tweeting the other morning, just lashing out completely at Mueller's investigation. We haven't seen that in a while. There seems to be some questions, a handful of them, that he's frustrated with. So it'd be interesting to see if he really has finished answering those, if he left some of them blank. How fully did he answer them? We still don't know the answer to that yet.
So big step, Tara, but we're not out of the woods yet on a potential subpoena fight here.
Right. It depends on when he hands over the answers. Is that enough for Mueller? Do they go into more negotiations? Does he need more questioning? Just because he answers, it doesn't mean the process is over. Although it may seem that soon we'll see a report from Robert Mueller, which would then just open the floodgates for investigations from the House. So they're under a lot of pressure right now. But the one thing we know about President Trump is he does not like to seem like he needs help from anybody. And I think that's why you heard him say, I wrote the questions, I'm the one who decides. And he thinks that they're trick questions.
And you've been in close contact with Rudy Giuliani, the president's chief lawyer in this matter. What's your sense on his willingness at this stage to sit down with Bob Mueller face to face? They've agreed to answer some of these questions in writing. It still sort of seems to be an open question. Have they ruled it out that the president will absolutely not speak under oath?
Well, Rudy Giuliani from the beginning has advised against this. This is something that he says he is advising against. The president from the beginning has said he's happy to sit down with Mueller, although he's wavered back and forth on that. It's obviously a risky scenario to put the president in, especially when he veers so often, even in just press interviews. If this is enough, they're hoping that answering these questions sufficiently will be enough to move on from this phase of the investigation.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And the president, when you ask him, have you ruled out a sit down? He says he hasn't ruled it out, but then of course goes into the fact that there's nothing for him to hide. There's no collusion, no obstruction. Yeah. Why should he have to sit down with him anyway?
His whole thing is perjury. He thinks that he will be perjured because he'll be tricked or trapped into it.
And many experts we've talked to say there is no upside for the president in this, but we shall see if this does come to a subpoena fight. And if those written answers are turned over, they could happen as soon as this afternoon. Thank you both for that. Meanwhile, the administration is moving forward, speaking of rules, writing some new rules on 2 different fronts, both with respect to the Department of Education and also to the press corps. We'll unpack both of those, but want to bring in Ann Flaherty, our agency's reporter, for a little more on what's going on over at the Education Department. Betsy DeVos, the Education Secretary, making some waves this morning, rewriting federal regulations over sexual harassment and sexual assault investigations on college campuses and at many schools. So Ann joins us now. Ann, give us the headline out of the Education Department on what they are requiring now.
Hi, Devin. What they put out this morning are guidelines for colleges that have to respond to sexual assault. These are any colleges that take Title IX money. They're going to have to respond to sexual assault cases in a certain way, and Betsy DeVos has put out those guidelines this morning.
And those guidelines are very controversial in that they have changed the requirement for when colleges under federal law must investigate these harassment claims and assault claims on college campuses. In a sense, Ann, they've really raised the bar here.
That's right. One of the big things that they've done is to narrow the definition of sexual assault. So it has to be so pervasive that a person who is alleging sexual assault, they don't have access to education or an activity. And that's a much higher bar than the Obama administration had. The other thing that they want to do is to ensure that somebody who is accused of sexual assault has the opportunity to cross-examine their accuser. They would do this not directly, but they would do it through a lawyer or an advisor. That's going to be a big change.
And it was much broader under the Obama administration. Any conduct that was deemed unwanted of a sexual nature was required under federal law to be investigated. So schools now being allowed to sort of be much more selective in that. Tara, I want to turn to you on this because the president has made this whole idea of presumed innocent until proven guilty, due process. We've seen it with so many figures, Brett Kavanaugh being one of them, him of late. This seems to be a continuation of that, a promotion on college campuses, sort of swinging the pendulum back in defense of the accused.
Exactly. This is a very Trumpian decision. It's in line with his administration and his idea of protecting the accused, because the president himself identifies as someone who has been wrongly accused, and he is never hesitant to point that out. So DeVos, who has been consistent in following his direction, is really aligned with what the president has wanted. It's interesting to see that the first step is in the schools, that they would change harassment laws there. Obviously, there are other arenas to be changing harassment laws, especially when during the Obama administration, so many students, remember the woman who carried the mattress around in Colombia because she didn't think her rape case was being taken seriously enough? It was an entire movement that they're reversing with this new law.
And happening at the time of the Me Too movement as well, when these issues are so much in the public consciousness. I want to go back to Ann. Ann, you've been also tracking the fallout from this decision today among women's rights groups, sexual assault advocates. What are you hearing from them, and is there any recourse from them to challenge this new policy?
I think there's certainly, you're going to see a big push. These regulations they don't go into effect right away. They're going to be put on the Federal Register, and a clock starts ticking at 60 days for the nation to provide their comments to Betsy DeVos, and then she gets to decide whether or not she makes these rules final. I think that even if you don't see the public respond, which they certainly will, I think you're going to see Congress respond. I think there are several House Democrats that are going to have something to say, and they're going to have control of Congress.
And we know you'll track that all the way. Ann Flaherty, thank you so much, and much more of Ann's reporting at abcnews.com and on the ABC News app. A big story on college campuses right now. Well, speaking of rewriting regulations and changing rules, the White House also faced with a legal decision today in federal court here in Washington regarding press access and the rules which govern who gets to go into White House grounds. This is the case involving CNN correspondent Jim Acosta, whose pass was revoked after a contentious press conference last week. Well, this morning, a federal judge did decide that Acosta needed to get his pass back. He is on the job right now. And let's bring in our chief legal correspondent, Terry Moran, who can help us break down what this means for press freedoms in covering this administration. Terry, the White House trumpeting this as a win for the First Amendment, but as you know, the judge didn't quite go that far.
That's right. The judge explicitly said that he would not base his ruling on the First Amendment. CNN was arguing that by stripping Jim Acosta of his White House credentials, Acosta's First Amendment rights were being violated. And the White House was saying, well, there was not for a First Amendment viewpoint. It's not because he was asking tough questions. It's because he put his hands on an intern in that press conference, they said. The judge, appointed by President Trump, Judge Timothy Kelly, said, let's not get to the First Amendment issue, because what's really the problem here is the way the White House went about doing this. It's a Fifth Amendment case. You've got a right to due process of law if the government wants to take something that it's given to you. Take away a security clearance, take away a dairy subsidy, or a position in the civil service or the military. And the government official can't just strip you of that by whim or prejudice. They can't say, we don't like Acosta because his middle name is Abilio or whatever, we're going to take away his White House press credentials. They have to show due process of law. They have to say, here are the standards by which, once granted a White House press pass, you can keep it. We will put you on notice that you have to abide by those standards, and if you don't abide by them, then you're going to lose it. And that's an important way of protecting press freedom without reaching the First Amendment. However, in response, the White House says, okay, now we're going to write the rules, and the first person that violates them will kick out. So we may be back in court on this matter at some point in the future.
Can I ask you a question, Terry? Because you've been covering the White House. You've covered White Houses before. When you see the decorum in the White House right now between the president and the press, what do you think? What's your impression?
Well, look, that's a great question. That is a great question, Terry, because every president complains about press coverage. And there are times in every administration when it gets nasty, when it gets really uncomfortable. I first got to the White House right after the Clinton impeachment. There was bad blood between the Clintons and the press. It does seem that from the get-go in the Trump administration, partly because he's such a rule breaker himself, he's a norm breaker, I should say, there has been a section of the press which fights with him more than covers with him, and he loves a good fight. He'll fight right back. He wins those fights. He's president. He's elected. Others are not. So I think it's hard-edged right now. It's been hard-edged before, and we are in such a divisive time with a president who is completely unafraid to cross lines that other presidents wouldn't have, that it does put press freedom and the relations between reporters and the White House in some peril.
Have you ever seen a reporter, though, in a press conference with the president have his microphone taken from him like that?
Not that confrontationally, no. I don't remember, but I've seen the clip of a White House reporter some 40-some years ago, Dan Rather, standing up, asking President Nixon a question, and Nixon saying, he was a question he didn't like, and so President Nixon said, "Are you running for something?" And Rather shot back, "No, sir, are you?" In a really kind of bratty tone. Which was the controversy of that era. I've never seen that kind of physical altercation, though, and I guess that's where we are.
Terry, before we let you go, I do want to get your response to the president on this. So you alluded to it earlier. The president is drafting some new regulations. The judge mentioned they didn't have an established process by which to limit reporters, strip Jim Acosta's press badge. Here's what the president had to say about what he's going to do in response to today's ruling.
We want total freedom of the press. That's very important to me. It's more important to me than anybody would believe. But you have to act with respect. You're in the White House, and when I see the way some of my people get treated at press conferences, it's terrible. So we're setting up a certain standard, which is what the court is requesting. And always freedom of the press, always First Amendment, but that's the way it is. And we always have the option of just leaving.
So, Terry, the next step in this battle, if you will, between the press corps and this president could very well be testing when the president or the press decide to test those new rules, right?
Right. The creation of those rules is going to be problematic. Is this Madame de Pompadour's rules of decorum in the White House? Is there a dress code? Is there some language that's out of bounds? Who decides that? But what they will try to do is come up with a series of rules that relates to respectful behavior in the White House that can't be manipulated to say it's really because we don't like the way this person is asking, the kinds of questions this person is asking, the viewpoint from which those questions come, because you do have a First Amendment problem there. On the other hand, I think the whole situation, whether it was the way Acosta decided to go about his business that day and the way the White House decided to respond, just shows that so much of our government has carried on in almost unspoken, mutually respectful ways that once you shine a light and say, okay, where's the bright line here between allowed and disallowed, you kind of destroy it. It's like you're dissecting a frog. You got to kill it to look at it. And that's sort of what's happening here. For decades, presidents and reporters, often very contentiously, have managed to live together in professional sense and do their jobs. But these two people here, these two institutions are now at loggerheads, and by defining, the courts are going to be asked to define where the lines are, we'll probably end up with less access to the president and the White House.
All right, Terry Moran, always colorful with the analysis. We'll have you back when that frog gets dissected, Terry, the next go around. Appreciate that very much, Terry, for that. Well, speaking of judges and courts, we're very honored right now to have with us an esteemed judge, a former judge from the Minnesota Supreme Court. This is Justice Alan Page, just awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Judge Page, it is a great honor to have you with us. Thanks so much for coming in the briefing room.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And as a fellow Minnesotan who has run past you many years in the Twin Cities Marathon playing that tuba on the sides of the road, I will say I'm particularly excited to see you, sir. But you've been honored by the president today, not just for your success on the playing field. You're, of course, an NFL Hall of Famer, Notre Dame graduate, but someone who's done a lot of incredible work for children in this country with your foundation. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do and what this award means to you.
Well, 31 years ago, my wife Diane and I started the Page Education Foundation with the goal of encouraging, motivating, and assisting young men and women of color in the pursuit of education beyond high school. And we do that two ways. One, by providing financial assistance, but more importantly, and I think the most important thing that the foundation does, is we require our grant recipients, we call them paid scholars, to do service with children, kindergarten through 8th grade, specifically in the area of education as tutors, mentors, and role models, sending the strong, clear message to those young children that education is a tool that they can use to achieve whatever their hopes and dreams are. For far too long, we have done a disservice to our kids of color when it comes to academic accomplishment. And our goal with the foundation is to create hope and opportunity.
And you certainly have done that. By all accounts, 7,000 children have received scholarships through your program.
7,000 and growing.
And growing, indeed, the Page Education Foundation. This award, you've written about and spoken about it being not just about you and your foundation, but about all those who have helped you along the way, and also some hesitation about coming to the Trump White House in light of the values that you stand for. Was it uncomfortable being there today? Did you have to speak to the president? Tell us a little bit about how you grappled with that emotion today.
You know, in the end, it isn't about me, but it is about, I think, the things that both my wife and I have sought to represent the values that we believe in justice, equal justice under the law, in educational opportunity, in working to ensure that people understand that the truth matters, that character is important. And so in the final analysis, it was pretty easy to be here. And I've been enjoying the experience, something that I would not have anticipated. It's, as I said, it's about those values that we have tried to represent, and it's also about those whose shoulders I've had the opportunity to stand on.
And
it is about my ancestors who came to this country in the belly of slave ships. It's about those civil rights people who gave the ultimate sacrifice, Swerner, Cheney, and Goodman, Viola Liuzzo, 4 little girls in a Birmingham Baptist church. Their voices, what they stood for, has a place in this White House. It is the people's house, and it was my opportunity to represent them in accepting the award. And in that respect, it was an honor and a privilege to be here and to receive the award.
Well, Alan Page, it's certainly an honor and a privilege to have you here with us on ABC News Live in the briefing room. Congratulations to you and our condolences to you on the loss of your wife just a month ago. Diane Sims Page, we know, was a very integral part of your work and the foundation, and our thoughts are certainly with you and your family. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you.
All right, a pretty incredible individual. List of individuals, not just Alan Page today, Tara, but we saw Babe Ruth's relatives being recognized. We saw Justice Scalia. Even a little bit of Elvis Presley was awarded the Medal of Freedom as well. Fun moment there in the East Room.
It was definitely a fun moment. And Hatch as well.
And
right?
Orrin Hatch,
Hatch,
Senator Orrin Hatch. And there was, before we leave today here on this Friday, we did spot someone else notable in the crowd there in the East Room for the Medal of Freedom ceremony. There she was in the front row, making her first public appearance after hospitalization just a week ago. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. looked to be in fine form and good spirits, even chuckling with the Chief Justice there. She broke 3 ribs in a fall just 3 weeks ago, just sending shivers down the spine of a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals, but she seems to be
And the
doing
president
pretty well.
said he was glad to see she was doing great.
How long was she out of work for? Maybe a week? No, days. Just 2 days.
She's a
It's
tough
incredible.
cookie. She's in the hospital just for a day. And there she is in public today.
Wow.
So great to see the justice back, and great to have you with us on this Friday to close out the week. We'll be back here on Monday at 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. Until then, Catherine Faulders, Tara Palmieri, and I wish you a great weekend. We'll see you then.